There can be no one too poor to vote. President Lyndon Johnson said this at the formalizing ceremony for the ratification for the 24th Amendment on January 23, 1964. The 24th Amendment abolished the poll tax, which stopped people without enough money, especially blacks, from voting. The poll tax was a tax that everyone had to pay to vote, so the people it impacted the most were the poor, which were mostly blacks. And in some places the poll tax was cumulative, so if you didn't pay the tax one year and wanted to vote in the next election, you had to pay the tax for both elections. Congress had been working to destroy the poll tax since 1939, but it didn't happen until 1964.
Come on. I see no changes. Wake up in the morning.
The start of Freedom Summer occurred when African American workers and students had begun registering to vote and organizing their own leadership groups in local areas of Mississippi. Organizations such as SNCC and COFO recruited followers, and soon over 1,000 volunteers had joined. The movement had already spread beyond Mississippi and continued to grow with 90% white followers. The main focus of the group was on Mississippi due to a low percentage of black registered voters. To keep the African American vote low, white government officials forced them into paying pricey taxes and asked them to make difficult literacy tests. Because of an unequal education, voting was extremely difficult for African Americans. As time progressed, Freedom Summer had gained widespread support. Medical workers joined in, providing them with health care. Freedom schools were set up in various areas which acted as an alternative to segregated education. Here they were taught Black history, constitutional rights, civil rights, and the freedom movement.
On June 21, 1964 in Mississippi, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner disappeared and were found dead on August 4th. James Chaney was a black man from Mississippi, and Goodman and Schwerner were white men from New York. Goodman and Schwerner had gone to Mississippi to help to work with poor and encourage greater amounts of black voters during Freedom Summer. The three men had been investigating an all-black church which had been burned down by members of the KKK. They were arrested that night for suspicion of church arson and were held in prison for 7 hours without any phone calls until they were released on bail. They were released only to be met near the prison by members of the KKK who had set up a plan with the Neshoba County law enforcement. The three men were beaten and murdered and buried a few miles away from the church. Their bodies were found in a massive FBI search of about 200 FBI agents. That October, 18 men were arrested by federal agents, but the state refused to try the case due to lack of evidence. 7 of the 18 men were convicted of a federal offense 3 years later. However, none of the men served more than 6 years in jail.
During his presidential election campaign in 1960, John F. Kennedy argued for a new Civil Rights Act. When the bill was presented to Congress in 1963, Kennedy included important statistics of black versus white lifestyles. The court debated the bill up until Kennedy's assassination, when Lyndon B. Johnson stepped into office and argued against Kennedy's bill. He feared social equality among the races. However, when the bill was later filibustered, Richard B. Russell decided he would put an end to blocking the rest of the act. Finally, the votes were taken and the bill was passed. The Civil Rights Act outlawed any discrimination due to all public areas. Even change was being made in the workplace, as employees were to receive equal treatment and opportunities by employers. The Civil Rights Act also made it possible for African Americans to vote and stated that uniform standards must prevail by establishing the right to vote. The schools began to educate equal under the law. When an off-duty police officer shot and killed 15-year-old James Powell for horseplay with a couple of other boys, the news of the killing spread rapidly, reaching a civil rights organization known as CORE. Wanted posters were plastered everywhere stating, "Wanted murderer, Jill and the cops." On July 18, 1964, outraged protesters stormed Harlem's 28th Police Department, but were prevented by a wall of armed officers who responded to the mob with violent retaliation. When chaos broke loose, the street was closed down by authorities, but this did not stop the riot. The protest lasted for over 5 days and even spread beyond Harlem. Over 6,000 officers had been called to control the mob, and there were many violent retaliations. About 500 people were injured in the riot. Later that year, Lieutenant Gillen, the officer responsible for the death of Powell, was found not guilty and cleared of all charges. Not too long after, Lloyd Seeley was named commander of the 28th Police Department and became the first African American to do so.
On October 14, 1964, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. King was the youngest winner of the prize since it was first awarded in 1901. and he is the 12th American to win the Nobel Peace Prize. In his acceptance speech, he said, "After contemplation, I conclude that this award, which I receive on behalf of that movement, is a profound recognition that nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral question of our time, the need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression." At a rally in New York City on February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated. Before he was killed, a man in the audience had said, "Malcolm is our only hope. You can depend on him to tell it like it is and to give Whitey hell." The 39-year-old leader was pushed backwards by the bullets just as he was saying his greeting. According to the police, Malcolm was hit by 7 bullets and 3 other Negroes were shot. Right before midnight, Thomas Hagen, a 22-year-old African-American, and 2 other men were charged with the murder. The 2 men were released from prison in the 1980s, and Thomas Hagen was released on April 28, 2010.
The march from Selma to Montgomery lasted about 3 weeks, in which there were 3 major events. The march was mainly for voting rights among Black people. It was considered a political and emotional peak of the civil rights movement. March 7, 1965 was called Bloody Sunday. 600 civil rights workers marched out of Selma to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was only 6 blocks away, before they were attacked by local lawmen with billy clubs and tear gas, and driven back to Selma. Then on March 9, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led a march back to the bridge. Then on Sunday, March 21st, 1965, there was a march 3,200 strong from Selma to Montgomery. They would march 12 miles per day and sleep at night. By the time they reached the Capitol on Thursday, March 25th, they were 25,000 strong. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 grew out of both public protest and private political negotiation. It began in 1961 when CORE joined together with SCLC to lead nonviolence demonstrations in Georgia and Birmingham to advocate for Blacks' constitutional rights. In Birmingham, a policeman named Eugene Bull Connor beat the prisoners with nightsticks and attacked them with dogs and water hoses. The next events leading up to the act were the Selma marches and the passing of the 24th Amendment by Lyndon B. Johnson, and when Lyndon B. Johnson spoke out about violence on Bloody Sunday. 2 days later, the president sent the bill to Congress, and it was finally signed on August 6, 1965. The act banned racial judgments and discrimination when registering to vote.
In 1965, Los Angeles was one of the few places African Americans were allowed to live. The tension was high in Watts. There was high unemployment, no hospitals, and most of the police were white. The riots all started on August 11th when a white patrol officer named Lee W. Minkus pulled over a black man named Marquette Fry because of suspicion of drunk driving. Fry was found drunk and started to resist arrest. Soon there were about 300 people looking on at them, and a rumor began to circulate that the officer had assaulted Fry, and fighting broke out. The riots continued over the next 6 days, and according to Police Chief William Parker, these rioters don't have any leaders. Many blacks did things including burned white buildings, beat up people, turned cars upside down, and shot at people. When the fighting ended on Sunday, August 15th, 34 people had died, more than 1,000 were injured, and over 600 buildings were destroyed or damaged.
Executive Order 11246 was created on September 24, 1965. Its purpose was to create equality in the workplace. It prohibited employers from lawfully discriminating based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin when the contract is over a certain amount of money. Black people were given more equal rights in the workplace as well as a better opportunity for work in general.